This morning, something happened that every energy trader, every diplomat, every military planner, and every person paying $4.50 for a gallon of gas has been waiting 70 days for. Iran sent its response. According to Iran's IRNA state news agency, confirmed this morning by Al Jazeera, Tehran has delivered its formal reply to the United States' latest war-ending proposal to mediator Pakistan. The response arrived after days of back and forth, after Iranian lawmakers described the U.S. proposal as an American wish list rather than reality, after Iranian President Pezeshkian said on X that Iran would never bow its head before the enemy, and after both sides traded fire in and around the Strait of Hormuz throughout the past week. Iran has sent its answer. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Michael Waltz, said the Trump administration had not yet received the response as of this morning, noting that part of the difficulty stems from what he described as Iran's fragmented leadership structure. Pakistan now holds both sides' positions simultaneously, and the next 48 hours will tell us whether the response that just arrived in Islamabad brings this war closer to resolution or closer to resumption. This is Terror Break, and right now, May 10th, 2026, day 70 of the Iran war, we are going to explain exactly where the negotiations stand, what the U.S. proposal contained, what Iran has been objecting to, why the next 2 days are the most consequential since the ceasefire began, and what the 3 scenarios are for how this plays out. Let's start with the state of play, because the past 72 hours have been the most complex of this entire war. Last Tuesday, May 5th, the United States paused Project Freedom, its 2-day-old operation to guide commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, citing progress in diplomatic talks. Trump said he had had very good talks with Iran and that it was very possible we'll make a deal. The stock market surged, oil prices fell. Axios reported that the two sides were closing in on a 1-page memorandum of understanding, 14 points that would formally end the war and start a 30-day negotiating clock. Then the fighting continued anyway. U.S. destroyers USS Truxtun, USS Rafael Peralta, and USS Mason transited the Strait of Hormuz on Thursday, May 7th. Iranian forces launched missiles, drones, and fast boats. CENTCOM said it intercepted all inbound threats. Iran said it inflicted heavy damage on American warships. The U.S. denied any damage. Both sides resumed the cycle of conflicting claims that has characterized the military dimension of this war since February 28th. On May 8th, a U.S. F/A-18 Super Hornet from the USS George W.H. Bush fired precision munitions into the smokestacks of 2 Iranian tankers, disabling them before they could enter Iranian ports in violation of the U.S. blockade. Iranian state media reported this as a major escalation. Trump called it a love tap and said the ceasefire was still in effect. Iran's foreign minister Arachi said his country would never bow to pressure and condemned the strikes. Iranian lawmakers accelerated drafting of a bill to formalize Iran's management of the Strait of Hormuz, including clauses prohibiting passage to vessels of hostile states. The IRGC's Brigadier General Amir Akramenia warned on Sunday that countries following the U.S. in enforcing sanctions against Iran would face problems passing through the strait. This is the backdrop against which Iran's response arrived today. Fighting on one front, diplomacy on another, both running simultaneously. So what does the U.S. proposal actually contain that Iran has been responding to? The 14-point U.S. proposal, reported by Axios and confirmed through multiple sources, has a specific architecture. It begins with a 1-month ceasefire during which both sides would negotiate the detailed terms of a final agreement. Iran previously rejected this structure entirely, arguing that a temporary ceasefire would give the U.S. and Israel time to regroup and launch further attacks. Iran's counterposition has been that any ceasefire must be permanent, not temporary. Within the 30-day negotiating period that the MOU would establish, the key U.S. demands are specific and verified from multiple sources. a 12 to 15-year moratorium on uranium enrichment, with 15 years being the U.S.'s preferred landing zone. Iran proposed 5 years. The gap between 5 and 15 is the central unresolved number in the entire diplomatic process. A commitment by Iran not to operate underground nuclear facilities, specifically Fordo, the enrichment plant built inside a mountain that survived the February 28th bombing, and that represents the most alarming element of Iran's nuclear reconstitution capability. A snap inspections regime under the IAEA, allowing unannounced visits to any Iranian nuclear facility at any time, and the removal of Iran's existing 440 kilograms stockpile of uranium enriched to 60%, near weapons-grade material. Two sources cited by Axios said Iran was prepared to remove this material. Iranian officials said publicly that it is not going anywhere. These contradictions between what U.S. sources say Iran has agreed to and what Iranian officials say publicly have been a feature of this negotiation from the beginning. They reflect a specific dynamic. Iranian negotiators cannot make final concessions without Supreme Leader approval, and the Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who replaced his assassinated father on March 9th, has been almost entirely absent from public view throughout the war, with his statements read by news anchors rather than delivered in person, and with 2 AI-generated videos reportedly used to simulate his presence. CNN's analysis, confirmed by Ali Vaiz of the International Crisis Group, concluded that Mojtaba is not in a state where he can actually make critical decisions or micromanage the talks, and that the system is using him to get final approval for key broad decisions, rather than managing tactical negotiations. This creates a fundamental problem. The gap between what Iran's negotiators can tentatively agree to in the room and what Iran's fragmented leadership will formally endorse is unknown and potentially large. That is the context in which Iran's response to Pakistan must now be read. The response has been sent, the details are not yet public. The U.S. has not yet received it through its own channels. What happens in the next 48 hours follows one of 3 paths. Path 1. Iran's response accepts the broad framework of the U.S. MOU proposal, the 30-day negotiating period, the uranium enrichment moratorium principle, the IAEA inspections principle, while leaving specific numbers like enrichment duration for the detailed talks. This would be sufficient to produce a signed MOU, a paused blockade, a formal end to hostilities, and the beginning of the 30-day clock. Markets would surge, oil would fall, the 230 tankers backed up in the Gulf would begin preparing to move. This is the scenario that Axios' reporting from May 6th suggested was possible, and that Trump's very possible will make a deal statement pointed toward. Path 2, Iran's response accepts the principle of negotiations but rejects the specific terms of the U.S. MOU as maximalist, as Iranian lawmakers publicly described the document. It submits a counterproposal with different parameters on enrichment duration, different conditions on uranium stockpile removal, and different sequencing of the blockade lifting versus the nuclear concessions. This produces another round of back and forth through Pakistan, extending the timeline but keeping the diplomatic channel alive. Trump would almost certainly threaten resumed strikes. Iran would maintain its Hormuz leverage while the military confrontations continue at a low level. Path 3, Iran's response is a rejection. Iranian President Peshkanan's statement that Iran would never bow its head before the enemy was made publicly and on X for the Iranian domestic audience. If Iran's formal response mirrors the public hardline rhetoric and refuses the framework entirely, the ceasefire structure collapses and both sides face the decision of whether to resume full-scale war. This is the path that a CIA assessment published by the Washington Post suggested Iran could sustain for approximately 4 more months before the economic pressure of the U.S. blockade became severe enough to force a decision. A CIA assessment that Iran can hold out for 4 more months is simultaneously a reason for Iran not to sign immediately and a reason for the U.S. to maintain pressure. It's the timeline that makes the next 48 hours so critical, because if Iran sends back a counterproposal rather than a rejection, the 30-day negotiating window that the MOU would establish still provides a path to resolution before that 4-month CIA-assessed threshold. 3 more data points from today that matter for understanding which path is more likely. First, Qatar's prime minister warned Iran in a phone call to Iraqchi that using the Strait of Hormuz as a pressure card would only lead to deepening the crisis. Qatar is a mediator. Qatar is also a country whose LNG exports depend on Hormuz. Its prime minister delivering this direct warning to Iran's foreign minister is not a courtesy call. It is a message from a country whose interests are directly harmed by the continued closure and that has been supporting Pakistani mediation. That Qatar is pushing Iran toward flexibility is a meaningful signal. Second, Turkey's foreign minister also spoke to Iraqchi today. Turkey has consistently been among the mediating powers trying to engineer a deal. Two major regional actors, Qatar and Turkey, both calling Iran's foreign minister on the same day that Iran's response was sent to Pakistan, is not coincidental. It's coordinated pressure. Third, Trump is due to visit Beijing this week to meet Xi Jinping. China's foreign ministry confirmed Iraqchi's Beijing visit on May 6th and meeting with Wang Yi. With Trump heading to China and Iran having just consulted Beijing's top diplomat, the diplomatic architecture around the next 48 hours involves every major player simultaneously. The Beijing summit creates an external deadline, a moment at which the geopolitical cost of the war still being active is particularly high for China, which has been Iran's most important external backer and which now faces the awkward position of hosting the American president while its partner is in an active military confrontation with U.S. forces. The response has been sent. The next 48 hours will determine whether it was a response that ends a war or one that extends it. Drop your country below. Are you watching from a country that has been directly affected by this energy crisis? This is the Terror Break. We will be back the moment the U.S. confirms what Iran's answer actually says.